If you've ever wondered what Dr. Pulaski would look like in full Sophia Petrillo costume, this episode is for you. That's 2 retro reviews in a row with a Sophia Petrillo reference. Will there be another one next time? I don't know, probably not. Sophia's not even my favorite Golden Girl. My favorite Golden Girl is Dorothy. I mean, obviously, she's the funniest, the meanest, the tallest. Man, all due respect to Diana Muldaur, who was always great, but now that I've said it, I kinda wish they'd cast B. Arthur. This is a review of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Unnatural Selection. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what sick shit Federation genetic researchers are getting into, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. This week, the crew of the Enterprise confronts everyone's worst nightmare. Children with superpowers. And also a disease that makes you rapidly age. The Enterprise is on its way to a place to do a thing, and meanwhile, Captain Picard isn't completely sold on Dr. Pulaski as, a doctor. He meets with Counselor Troy about Pulaski, and Troy says, "Hey, listen, no worries, Captain. Pulaski's cool. She's the most dedicated physician I've ever met." Picard's like, "Right, I get that, but do you think her dedication to her work as a physician could ever affect her judgment? And do you think that might become relevant within, say, the next hour or so?" Their conversation is interrupted when the Enterprise receives a distress call from the USS Lantry, a supply ship that's suffering some kind of emergency. They can't tell because the Lantry's last transmission is all garbled. The captain of the Lantry isn't picking up the phone, so Picard uses his authority as captain of a more important ship to reset the Lantry's password so they can activate its view screen remotely and see what's going on. It turns out the entire crew is dead from natural causes due to old age. But how is that possible? The captain of the Lantry is Riker's age. Dr. Pulaski checks the medical logs for the Lantry crew and discovers that they were all in perfect health except for the first officer, who had a case of the space flu 5 days ago. The last place the Lantry visited was a genetic research facility called Darwin Station. They quarantine the Lantry, and Pulaski warns they may have to quarantine Darwin Station as well, depending on what they find. They arrive at Darwin Station and talk on the view screen to this lady, Dr. Kingsley, who says they've just declared a medical emergency. She's like, "I'm only 35 years old." Picard and Riker are like, "You look good." "Yeah, 35? I'd never have guessed." Pulaski says, "Do you think this has anything to do with all that genetic research you're doing down there?" Kingsley says, "No, all we're doing down here is using genetic engineering to create not at all creepy telepathic children. I think the Lantry must have infected us with something when they stopped here a few days ago." Kingsley insists that the children must be rescued before this mysterious aging disease kills all the scientists at the station. She insists the children have remained in isolation, and they represent no danger. Picard's like, "I'll think about it, but if it turns out your children are carriers of this fearful affliction, or they're just off-putting in a way we're not prepared to deal with, I'm afraid they're gonna be shit out of luck." They have another staff meeting where Worf is immediately like, "I say we let them die, we have enough children on this ship already." Riker agrees. Pulaski wants to beam one of the genetically engineered super children aboard the Enterprise to examine. She promises to be extra careful and beam the super child up in suspended animation and wrapped in plastic. Picard agrees, and they transport one of the super kids, still in his blister pack, to sickbay. The kid is supposedly 12 years old, but he looks more like 25. Worf's immediate reaction is to excitedly shout, "A trick!" I love Worf so much. Like, does he even know what he's worried about here? "They said they were sending us a child, but this one looks older. We've been betrayed. Kill it! Kill them all!" Great job making the angriest, most paranoid reactionary on the ship your chief of police, Jean-Luc. Anyway, this is the right kid. He is 12, and he looks 25 because of the genetic engineering, which is totally normal and fine. Also, he's telepathic, which Troy can sense even though he's in suspended animation, which is, again, nothing to be alarmed about. It's totally fine. Pulaski and her medical minions run a bunch of scans on the kid, and he comes up clean, so Pulaski says, "I want to take him out of the plastic." Picard's like, "You want to remove him from the original packaging? That'll absolutely murder his resale value. Also, there's still a potential danger to the ship, etc., etc." With time running out for the rapidly aging scientists at Darwin Station, Pulaski has a quick chat with Geordi, then comes up with a plan. She'll remove the super kid from the plastic aboard a shuttlecraft. That way, if she's wrong and he is a carrier of the aging disease, she's the only one who will be infected. Pulaski doesn't know how to fly a shuttlecraft, so she goes up to Data and says, "Hey, you know how to fly a shuttlecraft, plus you're a robot and I don't care about you. Let's go." Pulaski and Data fly a shuttlecraft out alongside the Enterprise, and Data calls for O'Brien to beam the super kid over. O'Brien's like, "Hang on, I'm training a new guy and he is just not getting it. Just a sec." O'Brien and his incompetent trainee finally manage to beam the super kid over to the shuttle. Pulaski removes the plastic and the kid immediately sits up and starts projecting his thoughts into her mind like a well-intentioned and non-threatening character from a science fiction story. Pulaski's like, "Yes, I can hear you. I do think you look like Peter Facinelli. I agree, he was so much more than those Twilight movies. Yes, I thought Fastlane deserved a second season too." After about 20 minutes in the shuttle, Data waves a tricorder at Pulaski and declares that she's fine. Then, like 30 seconds later, she drops an instrument and clutches her arm in pain. Uh-oh. Dr. Kingsley said sudden arthritic inflammation was the first symptom of the aging disease. Looks like our uncomfortably mature 12-year-old telepathic Peter Facinelli clone is a deadly germ farm after all. Pulaski fills Picard in on the situation. Picard's like, "Well, at least I still have the resumes from everyone who applied when Dr. Crusher left." They beam the infectious super kid back to Darwin Station. As he beams out, Pulaski's like, "It wasn't your fault. Fastlane was just too expensive to produce in an era where risk-averse TV networks were turning toward cheaper, unscripted series instead of..." Oh, wait, that's not the bit. You only look like Facinelli, you're not. Anyway, never mind. Best of luck. Pulaski has Data fly the shuttle down there as well, since it's the only place Pulaski can go now that she's caught the aging disease. Meanwhile, Picard has decided he doesn't want to have to sit through another round of job interviews to find a new ship's doctor after all, so he calls yet another staff meeting to see if they can figure out a way to save Pulaski. While talking about the transporter's biofilter, Chief O'Brien, whose recent struggles training his new assistant have made him extra sympathetic to Picard's reluctance to have to hire another doctor, hits on a possible solution. He might be able to modify the transporter to reconstitute the person being transported according to their most recent saved transporter pattern. Since the pattern would have been saved before Pulaski was infected with the disease, it should screen out the disease and restore a healthy, middle-aged Pulaski. Picard's like, what else we got? Get started doing whatever you have to do. At Darwin Station, Pulaski, who is already looking noticeably older, and Data arrive. Dr. Kingsley can't believe that their super children could possibly have infected Pulaski. They were designed to resist disease. It shouldn't even be possible for them to have or spread an infection. Kingsley shows Pulaski and Data the isolation area where the super kids are living. They're doing normal things, like playing chess by moving the pieces with their minds, just typical kid stuff. Pulaski says none of them are older than 12, but they're all very mature. Are they sexually active? Kingsley's like, "Big time, but we try not to look since it's technically illegal." Pulaski thinks the aging disease must have something to do with that case of space flu the first officer of the Lantry had. So she asks Data to use his android superspeed to analyze how the space flu virus interacts with the jacked-up immune systems of the super kids. Data finds that the super kids aren't merely carriers of the aging disease, they are the cause of it. See, what happened was the immune systems of the super kids came into contact with the space flu virus brought to the station by the Lantry crew, and their immune systems released an antibody that altered the genetic code of the flu virus. Unfortunately, once the antibody got a taste for altering the genetic codes of things, it couldn't be stopped, and it started attacking the DNA of people it came into contact with, causing the rapid onset of aging symptoms. Because anyone who has come into contact with one of the super kids can be a carrier and spread the antibody to others, Pulaski declares that the quarantine of Darwin Station must be maintained permanently. The super kids will have to live out their lives in isolation. I guess Starfleet can stop by occasionally and beam them down some more food and birth control. Data says goodbye to a now elderly Pulaski, who tells him, "I appreciate all your help, and I just want you to know that had I lived, I probably would have begrudgingly recognized your personhood eventually." Data's like, "That means a lot, thank you, Doctor," and he beams back to the Enterprise. They pass Data through the transporter's biofilter. I guess it's easy with Data because they can just screen out anything that isn't robot parts. And Picard comes in to meet him and says, hey, if Dr. Pulaski's DNA were to go back to the way it was before she got infected by the Super Kid's antibody, would she go back to normal and then I wouldn't have to hire another doctor? Data's like, yeah, I guess. Picard turns to O'Brien and says, can you do that thing we talked about before with her trace pattern? O'Brien's like, we could, but it turns out she's never used the transporter before, so we don't actually have a copy of her trace pattern. Picard says, what if we had some of her DNA from before she got infected? Could you use that instead of the trace pattern? And O'Brien's like, what, are you kidding? We can't just take a sample of someone's DNA and plug it into this machine and expect it to... I'm messing with you. Of course we can do that. Riker and Data ransack Pulaski's quarters until they find a hairbrush with some DNA on it. The transporter modifications are made, and Picard walks in for the big moment. But O'Brien has one final warning. Because of the changes made to the transporter, if they beam Pulaski in and it doesn't work, they can't just beam her back down to Darwin Station. To prevent anyone else from being infected, they'll have to just beam her into space. Picard's like, I'll do it, and takes the transporter controls. They beam up Pulaski. At first, it doesn't look like it's working, but O'Brien's like, hang on, my new guy fucked something up. Try it now. And a cured, no longer elderly Pulaski appears on the transporter pad. We get a medical officer's log voiceover from Pulaski explaining that they used the modified transporter to cure the rest of the Darwin Station scientists, who will remain at the research facility with their still extremely dangerous and highly infectious super children, who will hopefully not one day decide to use their powerful mental abilities to escape and visit death upon the entire galaxy. The Enterprise returns to the Lantry for a solemn ceremony where they blow it up with torpedoes, and then they're back on their way to that place to do that thing they were supposed to do before they got pulled into this mess. The end. You know, there's a peculiar quality this episode has that, so far as I can tell among TNG episodes, is unique to Season 2. I'm a defender of Season 2. I did a Trek Actually video about it not that long ago. It's not without its low points, to be sure, but for my money, it's a lot better than its long-standing reputation suggests. But even some of the best episodes of Season 2 of TNG have this quality where they feel padded, but padded in a very particular way. The episode starts showing us extra steps, granular details of actions taken by the characters that we don't really need to see in order to follow the story, but which eat up screen time. For example, when the Enterprise first reaches the Lantry and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and Riker proposes taking control of the Lantry remotely so they can activate the view screen and look at the bridge, instead of Picard just saying, make it so, or giving the computer an order there on the bridge, maybe entering his private access code into one of the control panels on his chair, if they wanted to put across the only captains have the authority to do this deal, you know, something quick to move things along, we follow Picard into his office, watch him turn on his computer, request access to the Lantry, give the computer his passcode, then walk back out to the bridge, and then we watch as the crew verifies receipt of the code, takes control of the Lantry systems one at a time, and then finally turns on the view screen so we can see all the old dead people who died at their posts because they couldn't afford to retire. The same thing happens a couple of times during the scenes where people are being transported. Instead of just seeing the plastic-wrapped super kid beamed into sickbay, we first have to get a little scene where O'Brien explains how precise the operation will be to have the plastic materialize a split second before the super kid does in order to maintain the quarantine. Later, when the super kid is beamed from sickbay onto the shuttle where Pulaski and Data are waiting, instead of just having Pulaski say, energize, and then the kid materializes on the shuttle, we see O'Brien leave his assistant at the controls and walk to sickbay, and we watch while he stands there and watches the super kid get beamed away. It's not like these sequences take a ton of time, but they take up a lot more than they need to in order to move the narrative as far forward as they do, and it's noticeable. Things are moving along at a fairly reasonable pace, then all of a sudden the show becomes a technical procedural fascinated by every single minor link in the chain of events. And I'm sitting there watching like, oh right, it's Season 2, they must have been running short. It's just something kind of funny I noticed. I don't know. The episode is fine, apart from that. Not great, not exceptional, but not bad. The occasional sudden preoccupation with extraneous procedural details aside, the story is decently paced and sensibly structured. The Enterprise discovers the mysteriously aged crew of the Lantry, and what do they do as a first step to finding out what happened? Why, they retrace the Lantry steps and go visit the last place the Lantry stopped at. That's good, solid detective work right there. Once they reach Darwin Station, the problem becomes not only the aging disease, but what to do about the scary genetically engineered children. Pulaski conducts some tests to see if the children are safe, which is how she ends up exposed herself, raising the stakes, and things continue on from there. It's solid, logical writing. The aging disease in this episode operates more or less identically to the one encountered by the crew of the original Enterprise in the Deadly Years, and yet Unnatural Selection, which is written by John Mason and Mike Gray and directed by Paul Lynch, avoids feeling like a retread of that earlier episode. I don't know if Mason and Gray watched the Deadly Years while they were writing this one and consciously chose to take their story in different directions at key turning points, or if it just coincidentally worked out like that. Either way, it's a good thing. This is a Pulaski episode. It's really the only Pulaski episode, though she appears on almost every show of season 2. And as a showcase for Pulaski, it's pretty good. She gets a little bit more depth and complexity than TNG regulars usually got, especially at this early stage of the series. Despite Gene Roddenberry's insistence that the main characters be evolved, enlightened beings with perfect mental health and emotional intelligence, Pulaski shows a lot of hubris in this episode. When Pulaski tells Picard that she wants to remove the super kid from his protective plastic shell because she's sure he isn't a danger to anyone else, and Picard says, "But what if you're wrong?" Pulaski's reply is an immediate and totally confident, "I know I'm right." But she isn't right. Her hubris comes back to bite her. She finds her own life threatened as a result, and if Captain Picard had been persuaded to let her move ahead as she wanted without insisting on the increased precautions that eventually compelled her to unwrap the super kid in a shuttlecraft, her hubris would have potentially doomed everyone aboard the Enterprise as well. That's a pretty dramatic character flaw for a main member of the TNG cast to have. And the episode and the character are much the better for it, because the flaws are where you find the really interesting stuff. The episode also finds time to develop Pulaski's two most interesting relationships, with Data and with Captain Picard. The Pulaski-Data dynamic always gets a lot of attention because she's such an asshole to him at the beginning. This episode charts the progress that they've made since the season premiere, when she dismissed Data as a mere machine and didn't seem to care that she'd called him by the wrong name. Here, Pulaski's ambivalence toward Data being an android comes across in the form of a bit of mild teasing. When Data expresses concern about the safety of the super kid they're bringing aboard the shuttlecraft, Pulaski says, "I hate to keep reminding you, but you're a machine. You'll be fine." To which Data replies that he was actually more concerned about Pulaski, one of several moments where Data seems to genuinely care about Pulaski. When he leaves her behind on Darwin Station in the advanced stage of the aging disease, Data expresses regret for not being able to help her, and Pulaski is appreciative. They aren't exactly best friends, but there's a respect between them and even an ember of warmth. Pulaski's relationship with Picard is one of the great missed opportunities left in the wake of her departure after this season. I'm not saying I wish Dr. Crusher had not come back. I love Dr. Crusher and I love Gates McFadden, and I'm glad she returned to the show. But there's something so fascinating about Pulaski's dynamic with Picard, and we see it on display in this episode. Much has been said about how Pulaski's personality is largely a lift from Dr. McCoy, but the relationship between Pulaski and Picard is totally different from that between McCoy and Captain Kirk. McCoy and Kirk were close friends. Pulaski and Picard are most definitely not. Picard doesn't know Pulaski, and he doesn't entirely trust her. Pulaski, on the other hand, strains against Picard's authority as captain. She trusts herself and her judgment and wants to do things her way. The two don't hate each other or anything. They aren't enemies, but there's antagonism between them. There's conflict, which is a breath of fresh air on this show. Again, especially in this early era, where every other interaction between the main characters was so blandly benign. It's one of the most interesting relationships, not just of season 2, but of the entire series, and I wish we could have seen more of it and been able to watch it evolve and grow over the years. The other element of this episode that seems to generate the most discussion is the work these scientists are doing at Darwin Station. Several years after this episode aired, there was the Deep Space Nine episode, Dr. Bashir, I presume, which established that genetic engineering had been illegal in the Federation for quite some time. And yet, these scientists at Darwin Station are making genetically engineered superchildren, like, right out in the open. And some mild disapproval from Captain Picard aside, nobody cares. Some Trekkies are bothered by this contradiction. If you've been watching my stuff for a while, you probably already know that I couldn't possibly give less of a shit about that. What I do find interesting, in an amusingly absurd sort of way, is how random what these geneticists are doing seems to be. They're on this planet making telepathic, telekinetic superchildren just because, I guess? They gave these superchildren immune systems so ridiculously supercharged that their antibodies don't merely respond to infections, they prevent infections by monitoring the surrounding environment and projecting themselves out to attack germs and viruses floating in the air. And these scientists did that just to see if they could? Like, what's the end game here? You create a gang of children with Jean Grey powers who go through puberty at age, I'm gonna guess, 10? And then what? Who asked for this? Never mind, I do not want to know. The whole Darwin Station situation reminds me of that scene from Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie, when Mike and the bots are watching This Island Earth, and there's a montage of the characters doing general science-y stuff, and Mike says, "This is when science didn't have to have any specific purpose." I think if Dr. Forrester visited Darwin Station, even he would be like, "What are you people doing?" Unnatural Selection is an easy watch with some fun moments. Worf's "It's a trick!" Some very nice character beats, and a basic but well-constructed plot that explores a familiar Star Trek problem in a different way and conveys a message about the dangers of overconfidence and undirected scientific research with no clear mission or end goal. Some early TNG peculiarities aside, it's an acceptable way to spend an hour and a more than acceptable showcase for the regrettably short-tenured character of Dr. Pulaski. Those are my thoughts on Unnatural Selection. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this batch of reviews of wacky aging episodes continues with a look at another episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, this one from that show's 6th season, titled Rascals. See you next time for that. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.